information. Lots of things to consider. I want to invite next Thomas Doxiadis. Thomas Doxiadis is an architect and professor at the University of Patras in Greece. His work explores the relation between space and democracy and has worked for the Athens Olympic Games. Thomas is a graduate of the Harvard University, where he was a teaching assistant as well, and he has received numerous awards, amongst them the Harvard College Scholarship, the Thomas T. Hoops, the Rudolph Arnheim and Penny White Awards. And Thomas is going to present us something that makes cities nicer, some of the projects that you have completed in Mediterranean region and abroad. Thank you very much, Thomas, for being with us.
Thank you, Vassili. Thank you for the whole LUMA family for inviting me over. This is a beautiful place, and it's also, sorry, have to keep it correct. And it's also a very well-considered place. I mean, I'm deeply respectful and very happy to be here, and very happy to be meeting people and talking. So already, I was on the car yesterday, coming with Olivier, who's speaking tomorrow, and with Catherine, and we had discussions that actually helped here. So I'm here to say a few things, but also to listen and talk. So talking about history and the past, what's interesting is that the word history comes from knowing. It comes from someone who is an expert. And in contemporary English, history means knowing the past in a sort of in a scientific way. And story, which comes from the same root, means talking about the past in ways that are meaningful to people. And interestingly, also in contemporary Greek, historia means both. It means history as the academic subject of knowing, and history as the story about the past. So this is, from the green line from 2020 and back, or 2025 and back, is history. And then those lines going into the future in this well-known graph of potential CO2 concentrations are stories about the future, and we have no idea which story is going to be our story. My story starts with my good friend Sam, who's my oldest friend, who was a weather guy since he was very small. This is his, a yearbook entry that I prepared for him, and this is Noah sitting on Noah's Ark, asking a guy below, "You want to bet it's going to rain?" So this was because, Sam always told us what was going to happen with the weather, and then Sam left Greece. He went to Cornell and became a climatologist, and then he went to the National Center for Atmospheric Research in Boulder, Colorado, and he became one of the first people to start building international climate models, global climate models. And then Sam, this is us a month ago when the guys were back in Athens. So Sam has been telling me since the 90s, things are not going so well, Thomas. And just in the difference between the two pictures, in the difference between 1988 when we graduated and now, CO2 concentrations have gone from 350 to 400 ppm and are rising. And what that means practically is that we have left the comfortable period where we've been living for the last, let's say, 3 million years. We've already entered the periods of pre-3 million years ago, this was us then. So we're going back in history in a certain way. And then as we continue, we could be going even further back in history. And one of the questions I asked myself, and then I asked ChatGPT, is, at what concentrations, forget heat and everything else, just at what pure concentrations of CO2 do we start not to feel well as humans? And the answer is, well, at around 1,000 ppm, and we are kind of on our way there, we start to feel drowsy. So we're talking about a future where, added to all the other problems we have as a humanity, we will also be kind of more stupid, and that's not going to help. So the problem is that summer is coming. Okay, and we've kind of been aware of that problem because of Sam, and about 10 to 15 years ago, we started thinking, what could that mean for Athens? And, immediately we went to post-apocalyptic scenarios, so our mind is now working on pre- and post-apocalyptic, but we think post-apocalyptic is quite possible. And what could happen with Athens is it becomes North Africa. So hills become completely dry, water and soil is in the cities, and people are tending to small kind of green areas in the cities. The lower areas of Athens, which used to be coastal marshes, become the sea, and they become a kind of Venice, and people are living in the polykatikias and farming oysters in the ground floor. And then maybe food security has been destroyed. People start to, the city becomes little villages, just as it's happened before. I mean, we've been talking about previous stories. There's been the Bronze Age collapse in 1170s, approximately before 1070 BC. There's been the collapse of the classical world around the 5th century. Nothing as big as what we're seeing now, but we know what happened to cities. They turned into villages. They imploded. And what happens, there's a strange kind of justice, as opposed to the injustice that Lenio has been talking about. When civilizations collapse, it is the cities that suffer first, and it is kind of the culture that suffer first. And the people tending goats up on the hills, they're the ones to suffer last. So it's an inversion of the top becoming the bottom. Okay, so we're looking at the Mediterranean. It's an interesting area because it has great commonalities, but many different, let's say, zones. And I've had the honor to be heading the Greek National Program for Climate Adaptation of Landscapes. And the way we've been dealing with that is we've used metrics called bioclimatic and and phytoclimatic zones. So you can basically model or understand the climate of a wider zone and how it supports certain plant and animal communities, non-anthropocentric, but very useful for us humans. And what we're seeing is that there are cases when things are becoming a bit worse, but there are cases where a specific area will change and will become a completely different zone. So cases where sort of temperate parts of the Mediterranean will become semi-arid Mediterranean, and parts where the semi-arid Mediterranean becomes completely arid Mediterranean. And it is these big, big shifts that are the most worrisome to us. And the way we've done this in Greece specifically is we've selected certain case studies that are representative and interesting, and we've done sort of detailed modeling and assessment of current conditions of landscapes and seen what is happening in the future. And Lenio, of course, I will share this for you. So it should be public. I mean, we've been doing this for 5 years. No one knows about it. It's part of the problem. It's going to the ministry, and the ministry is putting it in their special drawer. Exactly. So this is Athens in the future, where the zones change quite dramatically, okay? And this is interesting because it is the entire Western Balkans, and things are really kind of changing very, very dramatically. And someone said to me recently, if you want to make a good investment, buy land for olives in Romania. So, okay. So, in terms of strategies, there are the strategies that are big and what we call thick. An example, again, from history is Athens has been growing for thousands of years, but as it grows, it's been sucking water from bigger and bigger mountain regions, and now it's gone well into the central Greece, and it's reaching into northern Greece now to suck its water. And what it does with that water is it uses it and then it dumps it into the sea, which is not very smart. And then if we look at sort of the small things, because we have to think on all scales, my eyes were open to this when I visited Australia, and I saw these holes, and they look like absolutely nothing, but in fact they're the watering holes of the Aboriginals. So this was the center of their world, because it's where water and life was. And it kind of opened my eyes to the fact that these landscapes that I have grown up with are water management landscapes and erosion management landscapes. So this is a quick introduction, and now very quickly, because I'm aware of time, what we have been doing about it, or how we have been trying to deal with it at a small scale as a landscape architectural practice. This is a project of 2001 on Serifos, which was an island that was already desertified because of various reasons, and the scope here was to reverse this desertification and to recognize the natural forms and processes like the little rivers, etc., and the man-made forms and processes like the agricultural terraces, and use these to create a new scaffolding and use irrigation, because you have to bring some technology into this. But basically it was about forming terraces, breaking up the ground, introducing alfalfa to bring nitrogen and organics into the ground just with the rainwater of winter, and sort of helping this become what it used to be in the past, which is an area of vineyards. Then on to a project that has been very important for us in our development of thought. It's on Antiparos. We call it landscapes of symbiosis because it's about bringing old landscapes and new human uses together, but also bringing kind of humans and nature in a certain way. And what we've been doing there is we've been looking at, again, natural processes. So looking to history or what remains of it, natural processes and forms, man-made processes and forms, and understanding how this can be used to shape a future. And what's been happening here, for example, we've been restoring the terrace system, extending it to hold new uses, working with the architects to locate buildings and other elements into this overall system, and then working with a number of strategies such as bringing the landscape in, using what we find locally as a way to make things beautiful and local and resilient. And the result has been good. There have been many issues, such as the issue of finding native vegetation, because at that point in time, this started also in 2001, we could not find it. So we started propagating it with local nurseries. Time is up, I know. How many minutes was that? That was 10 minutes. Okay. Okay. Continue very quickly. So we did an experiment with Olivier Philippi, who is out here in southern France, top Mediterranean plant specialist in the world, and the local nursery, which specializes in little plant production, to see which plants would survive with zero irrigation. And we monitored this for 5 years, and we came up with the plants that will actually survive. So this is a way for us to kind of combine research with practice and make a cycle that reinforces nicely, and also find a way to how do you also, because we heard previously about humans. In the end we work for human clients. So if we don't take account of this kind of human ecosystem and the various human needs, so this was a developer doing these 30 villas. He said, but I don't want my clients to have dry gardens. So he said, okay, very close to the houses, irrigation, artificial nature, but as we go out, we put fewer and fewer plants, and we allowed for natural revegetation. So the natural and artificial Mediterranean gradually grow together. And we show the before and after, because usually people ask us, what have you done here? Because it just looks like nature, which was already there. But all of this is, man-made. And then going to things that are, well, this is much more recently in Portugal, and I was there for the blackout. It was a lesson. I wanted to tell you a few things afterwards about the blackout, but using the same mentality, which is going into very sensitive ecosystems, working for developers and tourism, etc., and sort of using scientific methods to understand what is going on and propose something that is a real combination between nature, history, and a look into the future. And resilient, why? Because you're working with what already exists, and more with models about what is going to be there tomorrow. So on to, like 1 more minute, or thank you. Okay, so on to Athens, the redevelopment of the Athens Metropolitan Airport, International Airport. The first part of the park, which was the old World War II and Cold War hangars, and a lot of hard materials. And our, let's say, wish to do something that would be very beautiful, very exploratory, but also keep the memory of the site. And what we ended up doing is everything which is not a color remains as it is in terms of surface material. Blue is we are adding concrete, and red is we are removing. So start by minimal removals and additions. And then looking at history, the idea of the palimpsest of, Greece is made out of stone, stone is being reused. So we have this history of constant reuse of materials down to Pykionis. So when we do have to break one of these things up, well, when we have these things, we either use them, we polish them, we show the patina, and we put new uses on them, or we break them up and we use the material to make the rest of the park. So again, very quickly through photos of things that have been made by breaking up some of the materials. And it's shouting, time out. And even the, concrete makes sense. We said even the asphalt, why not? If we can make pavers out of concrete, why not break up asphalt and make pavers? It works. People are not enthusiastic, but it works. And of course, we're using vegetation because it's an airport that's becoming development and park. As much as possible, take vegetation and reuse it. Make things for native communities. So we don't think we're just working for people, native plant communities. We think the plants are one of our clients, so we want to make sure they're happy. If they're happy, the people are going to be happy. But basically, it's about looking at the existing ecotopes and bringing them into the park and creating the nature through those ecotopes. And finally, looking at people and their future thermal comfort, water, shade, a lot of play, because we have to put people together. Societies need to talk. People have to be in physical spaces together, not just digital spaces. So things to really bring people together, various strategies to make it pleasant in terms of climate. And this is kind of, we have to go through specific metrics. There's a worry we'll all have as architects. Are we bullshitting? Are we telling stories and making beautiful designs, but in fact what is underneath is not true? So these metrics and these certifications, and we were happy that this park got the first CITES Gold for new project in Europe, they help us see if we're doing things right or not, but they also point us in certain directions. So that's it for now. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Thomas, for this presentation of the project. It's very, very interesting. I will move on to inviting Bas Smets to present. Bas Smets is an engineer, architect, and landscape designer who has designed the parks at LUMA. He has completed over the years, together with his studio, more than 50 projects in many countries, and he works together with a team of architects and landscape designers. And each of the projects is the combination of larger research themes and areas that are focusing around the essence of landscape. And he collaborates very often with numerous and different disciplines, artists, scientists. A lot of the approaches, different approaches that he combines, and they play a role in his approach. Bas and the project that LUMA Foundation is supporting at Harvard was also the reason that the four of us met in Athens last year, and I think Bas is going to present some of the projects that he has completed together with the students of Harvard in different cities of the world, looking at ways of adapting to heat conditions. Thank you very much, Bas.
Hello. Does this work? Yes. Hi. Hello. Thank you, Vassilis, for the invitation. I'm very happy to present not my work, but the work done with the students over the last 3 years. But first of all, I would like to show you some beautiful colors. We have seen them before, from the 1850s, the nice, cool blue, to the 1900s, to today, and to tomorrow. And it's red. And I like to show this in a full screen because we have to understand how red this is. And so I've been thinking, as Vassilis said in his introduction, for us in the office, every project becomes a research project, and we try to use every project as a way to show what is possible. And I think up to now, maybe the biggest climatic change we've achieved is here, right outside in the Parc des Ateliers, where we dropped the perceived temperature with 20 degrees from a semi-desert to a Mediterranean climate. But lately I had been thinking, how can we create a method? How can we create almost a school of making climatic landscapes? And so I was thinking of also of the past, and also thinking of the theme of the unknown. How can you represent newness? How does newness come to life, and how do you teach that to younger students? So thinking of Van Humboldt, how he made a new representation of what he was discovering here, the Chimborazo volcano in Ecuador. Noting all the elements, I thought, can we start a new way of looking at cities as a possibility for nature? And so I applied for a position at Harvard, and I was named professor in practice for 5 years, working on one city per year. And as I said, I'm very happy to show you, I think it's the first time I present these 3 case studies, the first 3 case studies, New York, Paris, and Athens. And I'm happy to present it here at LUMA. As was said, the LUMA Foundation is supporting the studio. So I'll walk you through these first 3 case studies. The first thing we do with the students is mapping, cartography. I try to teach them how to make their own map, looking at older maps, of course, looking at tributaries, looking at flood zones, looking at heat maps, looking at green spaces. I'll just walk you through them. But the idea is I ask them to make a new map, in this case of New York, specifically Manhattan, what I call a microclimatic map. And so it becomes this map, and it's interesting because mostly you see New York City with its grid structure, but here you see heat wave, you see flood vulnerability. You can even see some interesting elements. I don't know if I have a pointer, but you see Midtown is actually cooler because the skyscrapers actually doesn't allow the sun to come down. So this heat map really shows us a very different way of looking at city. And then I ask the students to find a theme that can be reproduced and to apply that on a site. And I'll walk you through a couple of them. One very bright student was looking at all the scaffolding, and for those who's been in New York lately, there's plenty of scaffolding. Why is it there? Because every 10 years, people have to check their facades, and it's cheaper to pay the penalty of not removing the scaffolding than removing it and bringing it back up. And this student thought, or she calculated that the scaffolding altogether is 34% of Central Park. So it's 1/3 of Central Park that you have for free. And she said, well, if you just say that the fine is lowered if you add soil and plants on your scaffolding, you have hanging gardens the size of 1/3 of Central Park for free. And I thought it was very smart, this kind of American, almost New Yorkian way of bringing plants to the city. Another student was looking at the POPs. POPs is privately owned public spaces, and as you know, if you build less footprint in New York, as from the 60s, you're allowed to build higher. And he read through those regulations, and it was stated that you needed to plant 4 trees. And he was like, well, why 4 trees? So he said that we could use UTCI, and we could oblige people to bring the climate to a certain level, allowing you to build higher. And then in a similar way, you would have, I think he calculated, 200 POPs that suddenly would become a kind of a network of climatic spaces throughout New York. So again, one rule in regulations would suddenly produce 200 climatic spaces. And the third student looked at Manhattan and what it meant, and Mannahatta meant island of hills. And he thought, well, these hills have been erased to build skyscrapers, so the skyscrapers are the new hills. And if you would think of each roof as part of a continuous landscape, he thought we could bring back this kind of hills that we have erased. So speculative projects that are at the same time visionary, but at the same time very pragmatic. So we could implement them tomorrow. From New York, and so I'll just walk you through these 12 proposals of the 12 students. Then we brought the studio the year after to Paris, and we worked very closely with the city of Paris, with the director of urbanism, director of climatic transition. And here, unlike New York, Paris is really made with typology. So we looked at these typologies coming from Haussmann, Alphand, and we organized a studio in 4 typologies. The first one was the streets and the avenues. And looking at the city again, in a kind of detached way, we discover things. For example, what we discovered is that these streets and avenues are mostly parallel to the Seine, mostly on a contour line, mostly on a horizontal. So it's almost creating a cascade of plateaus, think Vietnamese rice fields, that could perfectly absorb all the runoff, all the rainwater falling on the hills, both to the north and the south of Paris. So you could imagine that these typologies of Haussmann suddenly become reservoirs of rainwater, because Thomas was saying or mentioning it as well. The city is the best way to capture rainwater, because all the roofs are waterproof, all the plazas, the streets are waterproof, except what we do, we collect it and we throw it away. We have to keep the rainwater in the city. And so you could use these typologies made by Haussmann and Alphand, take out a parking strip or a lane, make a special soil, a subsoil in which you can store rainwater, bring trees in that subsoil that bring the water back in the atmosphere, lowering the temperature. It's as easy as that, and we should deconnect the water of the roof to the sewing system. That should be just forbidden. An image of these students. Second typology, the open spaces. And bringing American students to Paris, the good thing is that we're not bothered by too much respect for monuments, if you like what I mean. Or I mean, they dare to go there. And the city was very interested in that. So the city actually pushes, say, like, make these plans that we cannot make so we can make it discussable. And so here the l'Esplanade des Invalides, and Napoleon is buried there. Well, the city has a very hard time keeping it green in summer. And so this student thought, well, let's make it into an arboretum of the future, planting trees on the grids of the Esplanade, but just bringing much more shade to the place. A third group looked at public buildings, and I like this image a lot, where the student thought, well, inside and outside, it's all microclimates, right? So can we imagine a kind of continuum of spaces that are cooled in the buildings, spaces that are a bit hotter outside, but reading the city as microclimates. And then the fourth group, and actually it's always a bit more drastic, the intervention. This group looked at the undergrounds, and actually a third of the city of Paris is quarries, is parking garages, is metro lines, is an underground. It was already part of the imagination of Paris here, for example, in the early 19th century. And this one student thought that maybe instead of preserving bones, the catacombes, we could get rid of them and use the underground as a refuge for climate heat waves. And so very beautifully she imagined different activities. Again, if we hit 50 degrees for a week long, we could all shelter in those existing quarries. And so this pushed us to this idea of saying, okay, at 2 degrees more, we can immediately transform these streets and avenues to collect rainwater and bring vegetation. At 3 degrees more, we can rethink all the open spaces, which the city is already doing. They just planted an urban forest in front of the city hall. At 4 degrees more, all the public buildings and the schoolyards, again, what the city is doing, can become part of a network for climate refuge. And at 5 degrees more, I hope we won't get there, you can really think the underground as a way of creating a cooled second city. And then we presented this to the city, saying that, well, here's a map of microclimatic interventions. Voila, a kind of a push in the right direction. So the idea is, and then we brought it to Athens, and Vassilis came with us for showing the students around. Lenio and Thomas were part of the studio, so I'll walk you through this last studio. Again, we did a microclimatic reading of Athens, and it's very important that they redraw it themselves. There is a knowledge in drawing that is not in the head, but it is in the hand. And I'll just walk you through these different readings they did to come to the number of proposals. So they choose their sides, and again, I asked them to choose not only a side, but also a theme. And And as part of the education, and it's always bothering them a bit, normally they get an assignment. And I told them, like, your assignment is to find solutions for climate change. You're landscape architects, your challenge will be exactly that. So I push them to find the site themselves, which is not easy. And so here again, we apply this +2, 3, 4, 5 degree methodology. And I'll walk you just a couple of them. One of the students thought, well, the inner public space of Athens has these spontaneous climbing plants. And so we thought, can that become a kind of an identity, like the whole inner city, all the public streets as a kind of underneath a cloud of leaves. Very easy to do. We spoke about it. We should engage the whole city in a kind of monthly planting of climbers in the city of Athens. The next group at 3 degrees more looked at all the rivers. All these rivers have been canalized, or most of them, and when there's flooding, it happens exactly where the river is canalized, because it is, of course, the lowest point. So we thought, can we again store or take all the rainwater of the roofs? Complicated maps, smart people in Harvard. But an easy system, can we store that rainwater as a kind of open rain river on top of the river that's canalized? So a kind of doubling of the water system. Interesting project, and this one I really particularly liked. Looking at archaeology, we have the main archaeology sites, and even that we planted trees on just to see what's possible. But I was more interested in the secondary archaeology, and every time there's a kind of and every time they find 5 stones, they stop excavation and wait to put a fence around it and wait for money from Europe or elsewhere to come to dig. But the money is not going to come. It's going to go to or ecological transition or to defense, European money I'm speaking. So we thought, can we imagine those archaeology sites as temporary forests? And from what I've learned at LUMA, because right here we're on the Roman necropolis, that's why we have all these hills in the park, is we cannot dig. We thought, can we, on this site, can we put a anti-root layer? That's easy to do. You can even put sensors to make sure roots are not going there. You add 1 meter of soil and you plant a forest. Temporary. 200 years, 300, 400, until the CO2 levels go down. And when in 500 years' time the CO2 is back to what it should be, you can cut the forest, you can make furniture out of it, and you can use your funding to excavate this archaeology. It's been there for 2,000 years, it can wait 200 years more. In that sense, you would have many, many little forests in Athens that can be used by people living there. It could be an amazing way of dealing with the past and the future at the same time. And then the last one, here also to the 5 degrees more. One student looked at all the hills, also understanding that with climate change, the different biotopes move up. And she was also looking at the rain that is kind of wasted or not used. So thinking of making a micro relief into those hills to kind of buy time. It's really about buying time and advancing or augmenting the biodiversity. So here too, this idea of 2 degrees more, what do we do now? We plant these climbers in the city center. What do we do with 3 degrees more? We think about the water. 4 degrees more, archaeology comes in play, and 5 degrees more, we look at the hills as the last refuge for this climate change. So, voilà, very quickly, these 3 first studios, we'll do 2 more. Hopefully, we'll do a publication on it, but it's been a very nice adventure next to the practice of making parks, to work with the students, to work with the LUMA Foundation on these cities, and to actually show I mean, and why do we do these 5 scenarios? Is that if you look at all these graphs, or like this kind of all this doom, I mean, it's like, yeah, you kind of give up hope, right? Like why? And so the scenarios at least tell you can do this now. You can, it makes it understandable, and you can deal with it. You can tell to us, like Eric was saying, you can go to a mayor and say, like, actually, you should do this now and think about doing this tomorrow. So it becomes a kind of a way of dealing with the crisis, and at the same time, still having a message of hope. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Bas. I want to invite back Thomas and Eléni. We will have a conversation. We will go through some questions. For the sake of time and also for the interlocutors and the discussion, I would ask the same question to everyone, and then we can aim to have a kind of like a 1 to 2 minutes answer from each one of you, so that we don't go over kind of like the time that we have. And the information that you shared and all the data, but also all the projects, provide an incredibly rich mosaic of emergencies on the one hand, but also possibilities and potentials, and also ideas, good or bad, positive or negative. And I want to ask you the first question, and I will start with you, Eléni, because you also, each one of you works with many different people all the time. Like there's many stakeholders, many different organizations, bodies, individuals. Eléni, from your point of view, who is the most important interlocutor at the table of what is most interesting for you and most relevant for you, most important? Who do we need to listen to first?
Damn. Can somebody else go first? Who is the most important interlocutor for heat?
Yeah.
For planning for heat?
Yeah. Who is the first body, organization, individual that you would trust?
So I have worked with cities, and now I work with you. I've worked with cities. I work with people, with communities. I've worked with academics and scientists and networks of cities, and now the UN. In a way, I think the most important person is the mayor. I think he's the one, or she is the one, that can really transform the world.
Yeah. Thomas, from your point of view, who is the most important interlocutor in the projects and the outcomes that you wish to have with your work?
I say there are two. It's the client every time, because we work mainly for private clients and sometimes for public, and in the public client would be probably the mayor as well. But it's also the various authorities through which projects have to go through to be approved. For example, when we were designing the first stages of the Athens Metropolitan Park, which is the bigger scheme into which this little park is connected, we tried to restore the two old streams, the Trachones and the Elliniko stream, and we were not allowed to do so because the code insists still that when you have a stream, in order for flooding to be prevented, it has to be concrete or gabion cross-section. So, both.
Bas?
No, in the city, it's absolutely the mayor. And you can see at which cities have been most active. Paris, it's one person that drives that. And I think in Europe, the mayor still has that capacity to really give form to the city. So I think that, luckily so, because it is really a specific knowledge of a site that you need to have. But then, as you also point out, Thomas, you also need enlightened clients. Arles is a good example. You need people. Your project is only as good as the vision of your client. So we, I mean, people forget that. It's super important that in cities or for private commissions that you find that dialectic between a client and an architect or a landscape architect.
Thomas, the next question is I will start for you. Projects and the problems are both local and global at the same time. How do you approach solutions? Are solutions also local and global, or are they more local, or are they more global? What does it need to be prioritized?
Well, again, I think it's both. I think we are fortunate to be living in a time of global learning, so we can learn from many other global and local solutions. But when it comes time to apply something to a specific location, you have to take all of that and apply it locally, and then that then becomes feedback into the global knowledge system.
Leño?
Yes, absolutely. I mean, when we're dealing with adaptation and building resilience, we have to start very locally because it really makes a difference, the knowledge that comes from the ground up. A lot of solutions are there, and they can be mixed with things that are other levels of knowledge that are more global. And the global has to exist and to be there and be waiting and be ready to absorb and to transform the solutions that are coming from the bottom up. This relationship between the global and the local is right now in a bit of a crisis because of the politics that we are facing. So it's kind of interesting because it's like things that we took for granted, which had to do with what Thomas said, like the global knowledge. Already we're starting to see that for example, I don't have access anymore in maps from the national atmospheric, what is it called? The NOAA, National Organization for Atmosphere. I can't believe it. Yeah. It's NOAA, N-O-A-A, which had all these climate maps that I often kind of had this reference, and I would go and I knew exactly where to go to get all this information, and they're down already. So what I'm trying to say is that we have to not take for granted things like the global knowledge and the global access to incredible resources that we've had up to now, because we have been living in a globalized world, and there's so much incredible value of things that we have access to that we have to really be careful about not losing them.
Bas?
I'll respond with a slogan: every leaf counts, and it's as simple as that in a sense, because every leaf is CO2 transformed into organic matter that lowers the temperature. So of course it needs to work locally and globally, but in the end it's about how to bring nature back into the cities at a massive scale, and then it's very exciting to find the right way of doing it in this city, in that city, with this person, with that person, but it's really about and again, for example, the teaching in Harvard, it's not more about one competition for one important side, but it's about a kind of a systemic way of doing that. That I think is the challenge between local and global.
Absolutely. Yeah, this is a big challenge. How do we scale up things this is the biggest challenge that we have right now.
And are politicians or cities connected in these challenges? Are they speaking to each other? Are they thinking that everything counts in the way that their future and the future of their citizens will be transformed, or they will be bettered in a way?
I don't know. I don't know. Are they? Maybe a bit. I know there's some. It's nice that there's this kind of a brotherhoods or sisterhoods of cities. But I think. Again, it's not on the national level, but it's on the level of the city. So it would be a good idea that they become a network of climatic cities.
What happened to the 100 Cities network?
It died. So we had this incredible network of cities called 100 Resilient Cities that the Rockefeller Foundation was funding. And it was an amazing vision of a woman, urban planner. And she basically created this idea that they were going to fund cities, and the cities would actually create strategies. And it's okay if they didn't have measurable things that, afterwards the Rockefeller Foundation could say, we built 3 hospitals that actually cured 5,000 people per whatever, which is what usually foundations and the humanitarians usually want. They want measurable results. And they actually understood that cities need to be transformed and that this will take time. And they started to try to make cities understand the notion of resilience through many different ways, and kind of introducing this, creating like a focal point, trying to break silence. I mean, really beautiful kind of program. And then a new president came to the Rockefeller Foundation that didn't understand it and didn't want that. He wanted something different. So and it was really strange because they just stopped it.
Yeah.
And it was
very
100 cities around the world. We all found out through the media that they were stopping the program. It was really weird.
I mean, you spoke about it will take a long time. How time is important in the implementation of solutions, of thinking, and how time is important also in the way of looking at data, and whether, I'm wondering whether looking at data constantly allows us to move forward with the longer term solutions or not.
Oh, that's such a big question.
It's for everyone, you can share it.
I'll start. Can I start? So, because it brought things to my mind. So we have these people that love data, which really bug me, because they want data, and they don't do anything, and they want more data in cities, and they have to stop we have to stop being data larni, data obsessed,
lovers.
yes, data lovers. We can kind of have some data, and then we have to use data just to the ones we need to act. On the other hand, this incredible revolution of AI is opening unbelievable opportunities, especially for things that we're dealing with. So theoretically, there is like a really beautiful possibility for knowledge. And I don't remember what you were saying. What was the question?
The longer term
we have
solutions.
time?
The longer, do we have time? I mean, this is the whole thing, is that we don't have time. We don't have time at all. We have to rush. And we were talking about that with Thomas, that we both think that we are rushing, that history has taken over, and we're like looking into the already into a future that has passed, and we are but at the same time we need to now more than ever to actually listen to scientists and to listen to specialists, and so we don't just do stupid things that we don't know what we're doing, which we did in the past because of this reason or that reason. We have to depend on knowledge, and this is really crucial. So we have to collaborate. Now more than ever, we have to join forces and have interdisciplinarity more than ever before to inform projects.
And we have to take risks. Because we have to experiment more. If we are like blind struck by data and we want to make sure that it works, then we don't do anything. If we know that if we don't take risks, it's not going to work. So we need to take measured risks, but we need to take risks now and just change the way that we are living in cities.
Could you give an example of a risk that we can take now?
Again, outside here, it was a risk. It was a risk of bringing 80,000 plants on a desert. It was a risk of calculating the water, calculating the soil. But if you have the right specialists, if you have the right vision, and if you take the right risks, you can actually change it. I'm using this all the time, but it is now a living organism. It doesn't need us anymore. We can enjoy it, but if we are gone, it's there to stay. And think of all the industrial wastelands that you could easily transform that way. But it needs to be on a massive scale. So it's not we can make some projects as an example, and then we should reproduce it.
And we need the funding for that.
Something that was common in all three presentations was also the relationship to water and to irrigation and to cooling systems. Thomas, I want to ask you, how important is water, and how can we use water more wisely?
Well, in the Mediterranean context, it's extremely important. But I was talking to a colleague who just moved back from Ireland, and he said that they're running out of water because they don't have the infrastructure to collect and store it. So with just little fluctuations of rain, like they have no water to drink in Ireland. So, so I think the Mediterranean, thinking from a Mediterranean standpoint, people have been collecting water forever because it's been the main limiting factor to life. And that's what we kind of need to do. We have to be much better. And Bas, who's, students, but personally has been doing amazing work around that. And other forerunners give us, very good ways to do that. And again, it can be big scale, it can be a city scale, and it's also what's happening in Australia, where every house is obliged to have a water collection tank, and which is officially happening in Greece, but people aren't really doing it.
You can bring soil, you can bring plants, you cannot bring the water. You need too much water. A big tree consumes 200 liters of water that it brings back in the air. So water is going to be the most scarce resource in the coming years.
We did this project in Athens where we created a small, it was a container, as big as a container, that we put in a park, and we tapped into the sewage so that this nursery of the municipality of Athens, the water that the plants grew was from the sewage. And it used solar panels to work, and I mean, this should be the way we water our parks. When I mean, this sewage in all cities, we could have these quick mobile units, and we could develop them really easily, because we have the technology in countries that actually use this to the last drop. Like Israel uses sewage, and a lot of other countries for irrigation for decades. So these are things that are not rocket science, but also old ways that we used to do things that we have abandoned, together with new ways, I think is a really important.
Yeah, I did a project 10 years ago in Bahrain, and everything is irrigated by what they call TSE, beautifully treated sewage effluent. I mean, basically what's coming from your toilet. And it's amazing. These plants, like, it's better than rainwater. Exactly. And they now have a full system, a full canalized system of TSE to irrigate all the public parks. And that's, I mean, again, in most of our medieval European cities, we're mixing rainwater with grey water. Then we bring it to a sewage plant. That has to be reviewed totally. And that's super urgent.
Can I say something about Bahrain? Because it's a very good, bad example. So of Bahrain, the Prince of Bahrain, I don't remember if it's probably Prince. The Prince of Bahrain decided that they were gonna plant 1.85 million trees by 2030, I think, for their CO2 emissions, to lower their CO2 emissions as part of the commitment of the country for climate change, for mitigation. So they took this number, 1.3 million trees. I think it's million, I don't think it was billion, I think it was million. And they kind of said, okay, that means per year we have to plant that much, per month we have to plant this much, per week we have to plant this much. So basically they started the first few years to just plant trees in a row, in rows, in the areas that were empty. And as the years are passing, it is becoming more and more hard, and they use this water, which is extremely expensive because it's either from desalination or from sewage that they put into pipes, and they bring it to these big plantations of trees, and they plant trees like they are lettuce. Like they plant a tree, and it's like these big rows of trees. And this is an example of how not to do trees. And a lot of, we've seen a lot of this around the world, of people like using trees as basically greenwashing and creating plantations instead of forests. So this is another thing to kind of think about water and how we are spoiling water to do things that are stupid.
But just to get back to one point, saying that water is expensive, water is the most important source for life. So it's, we should think of it as something very expensive, even if we're not paying for it. And it's okay, I think, to pay for it, because in the future we'll have to get into the mentality.
Absolutely.
You spoke, Eléni, about the trees that were planted in Bahrain, and I wonder, it brings to mind the question, do we plant individual natural environments, or do we plant ecosystems? Do we have to think ecosystematically, or do we have to think in micro, individual scale of pockets of things? And how does it work? One tree or a forest? What are the differences? What are the possibilities for systems like cities in the current state of rising temperatures?
I think my answer is both. Everything. We have to try. As Bas said, we have to experiment, try everything, see what works. And we had a discussion when we were in Athens together of trees that are considered invasive, and we had this with talking with Veronique Mur yesterday. These invasives are actually the best adapted to climate change. So maybe
the Ailanthus altissima.
Yeah.
We saw it recently,
Yeah.
so we were talking about it, and she said, "I love them because they're so resilient."
So I think it's not only the Bahrain, it's not only like Greek ecosystems. It has to be all of these.
But one thing that we have to remember is that in cities it's extremely important to get the citizens involved, because they have to figure out and to adopt the trees and to adopt the ecosystems, because they have to be supporting them in the future. The cities don't have the resources to deal with parks and with trees and with all these things. So you have to get the citizens to understand and to adopt them, and even to pay the citizens to take care of them. Like, part of, what you could do with carbon credits, which they're doing in Freetown in Sierra Leone, is actually paying citizens to plant trees and design where the plant should go with the citizens, and then kind of give them a little bit so that they maintain the trees in at least the first years when they need more support, which is really important.
So in Belgium, they have this competition in Flanders. It's called tegelwippen, for those who speak Dutch, which means kick out your paver. Yeah. And so the idea is they do a competition between cities, and the one who takes out the most pavers to plant climbers has won. And so you have and it's quite funny, because then you have the top three, so you see, and so the government gives the climbers for free, and it's the people that then choose where to do it. And I think we should do that in Athens.
But the idea of urban gardeners,
incentives.
So the idea of urban gardeners and actually creating and allowing these groups is very important. Like, getting citizens, because you're right. I mean, cities are stressed on so many levels. You can't expect them to plant millions of trees and take care of them. And I know people who are already doing that, and we are afraid of being caught, actually.
Paris did that. Hidalgo did this really, really cool thing where you could get very easily a license to green part of the place in front of your house. And it was great, because they didn't get into super aesthetics and difficult kind of ways of doing it. You could just make an application, they checked if it's okay, and then they gave you a license to take out some of the pavement or to put some extra things in that thing there, and just kind of allow the people to do things instead of constantly pulling them back through legislation.
In the same vein of the question, how about giving incentives for planting edible or farming cities? What do you think of these approaches, and are there solutions there, or are there elements that can be productive and usable? Can they create some sort of infrastructure that could adapt certain elements of cities into something much more viable? Bas?
I think that's something that's interesting for roofs, more because it needs a secluded space. It's hard to do it in public space. We've been trying to bring orchards, for example, in a project in Antwerp, but it's a lot of maintenance, and you don't want all those fruits to fall on the ground either. So I think it needs a kind of fenced moment, because it's not a public space, a garden. But I think on roofs, for sure, it's happening more and more. But it's hard to plant fruit trees in the street.
Well, yes and no. Just thinking, when my father was growing up, Athens is full of bitter orange trees. And people, I mean, in the war, it was a source of food. So, yes and no.
They ate them? Yeah. The bitter oranges?
Yeah. I mean, they used to eat them, and they used to make this sweet.
Yeah.
And they boiled them, they ate belts and shoes in the war. So, of course, they ate the bitter oranges.
But the bitter oranges were because they're more resilient than all of the other citruses, right? So that's why they planted them all over the country.
And maybe one more question very quickly before, do we have time for also for questions from the audience? I think maybe one more question from me and then we can close here. I just want to ask you, are you positive about temperatures being more controlled? Are you positive about solutions that can bring CO2 levels down?
I'm very scared, very negative, and for that reason, very motivated.
Yeah,
Same.
I'm not at all at ease with what's happening. Not at all. But as Thomas said, it makes me go bolder. You know, we have a moral obligation to stay positive.
Yeah.
Me too. Exactly the same. And if I wasn't doing this job that I'm doing, I think I'd go crazy.
Well, thank you very much. I think what you're doing is very important. Thank you very much again for being here.